Well, good morning, Bob.
Good morning, Bill.
We're here this morning, FNC's Morning View, and we're talking about what creates the value in a house.
Yeah, you know, I was asked to review a paper that's going to be presented this week at a conference up in D.C. and the authors took an interesting approach. I thought they just simply said, okay, they're going to try and understand the underlying value of the property, the land, and see how much that drives various types of things in the housing market. And so they took this simple model. They simply said, okay, let's take the market value of the property,
Measured by sales price or
AVM or a model,
some measure, some
or an actual
measure.
sales price, and then subtract from that the depreciated construction cost of the house, what they estimate from the data from Marshall Swift Beck.
Well, that's almost a cost approach to value, and for residential property, that's really not used.
So that leaves, you know, all the rest of the value associated with the land. And I thought, well, wait a minute, there's a few things that go on besides that, you know.
So let's take a step back and let's talk about what contributes to the value of a house. If we go back in the real estate literature, there's this whole concept of a bundle of amenities, and you get many things when you buy that house. You get some consumption amenities,
right,
and you get some investment amenities.
And there are other things that drive the value of the house. They're part of that consumption package. But you know, if you take two houses that, in terms of construction costs, would be estimated to be about the same, one having, you know, 1,800 square feet and 3 bedrooms, the other 1,800 square feet and 3 bedrooms. And yet, they're going to have different market values in many cases because the way the kitchen is laid out in this one is
the type of appliances,
you know,
the type of appliances, many things.
A lot of things, you know, and so you just can't capture all of that just merely with construction costs. And then with the big run-up in prices that we had prior to 2006, a lot of that was speculation. That was an investment, you know, and people were thinking that their housing prices are going to continue to go up forever, and they're going to have this massive amount of wealth, and they were taking that money out as it was accruing.
Do you blame them?
I don't blame it at all. You know,
it was like free money, like they had their own ATM.
Exactly, and so, you know, that's a big component, or it can be a big component of the value of the house. So let me ask you a question: how would you estimate, if you were trying to estimate that portion of the value of the house, how would you estimate how much of the value of the house was essentially an investment security?
Well, you know, there's several ways to do it. Let's take a step back. Let's first talk about the approaches to value, and then we'll sort of back into the answer to your question. Most of the real estate literature says there's the cost approach, the sales comparison approach, and the income approach to value. Right. And for housing, the sales comparison approach, what it trades for in the open market. What you're talking about is the investment component. An appraiser would look at what comparable houses rented for,
right, but
that also has got some consumption aspects in it as well. The government has used this owner equivalent rent calculation as trying to estimate what a house would be worth if you rented it. You know, you owned it and you rented it. What kind of income stream could it generate?
Right. Part
of that is attributable to the building, and part of that's attributable to the land. And for a long time, appraisers have tried to segregate the building components from the land components. It sounds like the authors of the paper you're reviewing are economists, number one.
I think they're finance.
No, they're finance. They could be finance people. They could be economists. But having said all that, I think that the literature goes to great lengths to look at, and practitioners do as well, to look at what the returns are to the land. And this goes way back in economics and economic thought. You remember the factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship.
Right.
The labor, capital, and entrepreneurship go to the building, and some putting the deal together, but land is a separate factor of production. And so people have long wondered what the relevant return is to land. and there's some other ways to look at that. They look at rates of return in comparable properties in other markets, and they even look at other types of land use and try to build up what the returns to land would be. It's been a big issue over the years.
Well, you know, I was kind of curious after I started thinking about it if there was any literature on looking at the speculative value of owning land versus the speculative value of owning a house.
Oh, yeah, the rates of return are very different. That's why the banking regulators have imposed different underwriting guidelines on, they call it raw land. I've never seen it raw land as opposed to cook land, I guess. But there's a loan-to-value ratio, a maximum loan-to-value ratio of 65%. I think it's 65%. It used to be 65%. I'm a little dated.
Right.
I'm a little dated. All right. But it used to be 65% for vacant land.
Uh-huh.
And it was up to, actually, if it's owner-occupied, there's no theoretical limit. It can be whatever
For the home.
for the home.
Right.
But having said all that, the reason has to do with liquidity. So there has to be a bigger return because it's less liquid.
Right.
I mean, just all things being equal, vacant land is much less liquid, so it's riskier. Therefore, it should achieve higher rates of return per dollar invested.
But have you seen any empirical studies where they actually analyze that?
I have. Well, I've seen where they looked for the return that's attributable to the land and the yield and cap rates on the land. I've seen several studies. This morning, without enough coffee, I cannot cite you the authors, but maybe in the future.
I was just trying to. I couldn't find any when I did a cursory look, and
Dr. Google didn't know?
What?
Dr. Google did not know?
I couldn't find. Where they actually tried to quantify what the market was giving in terms of the return on the land versus what the market was giving in terms of the return on a home. And see what during that big rise up, what my just casual observation is that land prices were not rising as fast as the housing prices. And so the return on that land was not as high as the return on the home during that, because there was so much, such a feeding frenzy for the homes themselves.
And you would think, though, economic theory would tell you just the opposite.
Right.
And so the only researcher that I remember that actually tried to isolate the impact that I can recall this morning at the appropriate time, Pete Colwell at the University of Illinois wrote several papers. He actually did it in the context of a hedonic index.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the variables was land and the vector around the change in land price. Right. So he had an input that was measured over time.
I'll see if I can go find that.
I probably got it somewhere. Find it is the key.
Yeah. Right.
And so if we go back and we talk about that, why would people want to know that? Well, and who would want to know that? Well, insurance companies would want to know that because they don't have to replace the land. Right. That's one. The tax assessor would want to know that because the building is depreciating.
Well, the purpose of this was to say, okay, should the regulations be designed differently than they currently are to try and avoid the kind of bubble and crash that we had, and would it matter if you understood the various components of the value of the price of the house and whether or not land was a major aspect of that?
Well, then the implicit assumption there is that building prices are not speculative, and also the sum of the parts equals the value of the whole.
Right.
And
that's not clear to me.
That's exactly that's not true.
In fact, I was reading another paper actually this weekend where they were coming up with a new way of measuring prices, an actuarial measure, and to try and smooth out price movement over time. And I was trying to figure out, why would you care about a smoothed out price?
Well, they want to get the seasonality effects out of it. There's some.
Sure, but if you're lending,
well, you care about seasonality.
You absolutely do. And if there's a bubble, you care about that bubble. If there's a crash, you care about that crash. Who cares about a smoothed out price?
Well, it's good for economic research. Hey, we're out of time.
All right.
I'm Bill Rayburn with Bob Dorsey. We're talking about land prices, and you all have a fantastic week.